Hello there, dear listener, and welcome to the podcast with no name. You're here with the Princess, and today I am joined by Sid and the Captain, and we are talking about 90s music, but it becomes a ramble, dear listener, about all things 1990s. So sit back and enjoy and have a bit of a reminisce with us. I had a thought, dear listener, that we might talk about grunge, the style of music that seemingly emanated from Seattle in the late 80s, early 90s. Some of us thought we should expand it to music in the 90s, and I'm good with that too. So, Captain, Sid, what do you think? Let's start off.
I think starting with grunge is the perfect way to start the 90s.
Dear listener, you may notice that Sid's had a sexy makeover over the summer, and he is now speaking in his sexy husky voice. Let's go grunge. I love it.
So grunge, like punk and all the different names of things, you know, what does it actually define and what do you think it represents? And, you know, is it a feeling? Is it a music? Is it clothing? The lifestyle?
Well, you know what, Captain? I thought about the topic and I haven't given the topic another jot of thought since. So I haven't got a formal definition. I haven't done any research. I'm just thinking, oh, that sounds like a nice topic.
Well, if you want an overview, dear listener, you can go back and listen to our 27 Club Kurt Cobain episode, because we spoke a lot about grunge and, you know, the different music styles and that. And so that's where I thought maybe we'll just extend it out a little bit to 90s to be able to encapsulate a bit more music that was going on. But certainly grunge was a big part of the 90s. And, you know, depending which side of the fence you sat on, you know, was it everything to you or nothing at all? We have some members of the podcast where it means absolutely nothing to some people.
And you'll notice that they're here today, dear listener.
But then we have, you know, 90s boy bands, which were equally as huge. And we all know their songs because they're played on Smooth FM every 5 seconds. Then I was also listening this morning to some Australian 90s stuff, and I was listening to Vicar and Linda Bull and the Black Sorrows, and then I started thinking about Died Pretty and Hunters and Collectors and how they sort of, you know, came out of the 80s but really had their time, if you will, in the 90s. And I love all of that stuff as well. Australian 90s music, you had a lot of alternative music, but then you also just sort of had, I don't know, you could describe it as rock and roll or just general really good music. Maybe it doesn't fit into a particular category.
I love the Whitlands.
See, I don't.
No?
But yes, no. But that's a whole other podcast. But, you know, that's the example. Like, you know, are they alternative? Because they did actually.
They went extremely mainstream once it was just Tim left. But I'm thinking of their early stuff. I love it. The early stuff when you can feel Newtown in them.
Yes.
And some of the direct references too.
Yeah, very direct.
The song about a Lansdowne hotel comes to mind straight away.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have Britpop as well. Like you can't forget
take
Oasis and Blur and the rivalry there and all the huge bands that came out during Britpop. So that was a huge part of the 90s.
And I do love that too.
I love Britpop.
Yes, Britpop's
Love
great. Jarvis Cocker. I stumbled across on YouTube recordings of Letters Live where celebrities read out letters that have been sent. Some are very old, some are newer, some are more recent, on all different topics. And Jarvis Cocker was one of the celebrities who was reading. And oh my goodness, he just has become, he looks now like a middle-aged academic. And I'm sure he's got patches on his elbows of his coat if I had looked.
Yeah,
but he's got the best voice.
Pulp had been around for a long time before. They were around in sort of, mid to late 80s. So by the time Britpop came around and Pulp sort of had, become mainstream, if you will, they were quite old by comparison. They weren't 22 like all the others. And, I love Pulp.
Yeah, Common People. It's just the best song. And it reflects what was going on in Britain at the time.
Yeah. Well, of course, you look at the soundtrack to Trainspotting.
Oh, yes.
And, and the movie Trainspotting. Like, did that sort of really kickstart, Britpop? Is Britpop music? Is it the whole thing of, like we were describing, what is grunge? Is it this? Is it that? Is it just the music? So it's, it's very cultural and so spreads across everything.
Yeah. Yeah,
I can see some parallels between grunge and punk from an attitude point of view. And I think the first thing was that they were both reactions. And I think
absolutely.
I remember it being said at the time that grunge was America finally understanding punk in terms of punk came in. Oh, I don't know. This is 30 years ago. But I got it. There was an economic downturn in the early 90s. It was hard for people to survive. There were job turn downs, fewer jobs around and industries were changing. Punk happened in the 70s when there was big economic downturn in the 70s as well, and early 80s as well when Thatcher's Britain started. And there were coal strikes and all sorts of things happening. America, they had the Ramones. So, wipe that.
Yeah.
When you look at the poster boys of both, where you look at Sex Pistols very famously had some very anti-Pink Floyd shirts, just looking at the music industry at the time, when you're looking at what some of the stuff that Pink Floyd did, and their reaction to it is, why do you need to be accomplished musicians? So, music is for the people. Why can't you get some mates together and have a lot of fun? So it was like a reaction to that. But I think you're also right about the background as well. Maybe they could not learn music in their instruments properly because of the poor economic times as well. I think the reaction that happened in America was to those big kind of hard rock, kind of glam type bands where they had video clips with girls and cars and, all that kind of thing. And I think with grunge looked at it and thought, this is completely inauthentic. We want music where people can actually enjoy themselves. It's very guttural. We're not going to have all these fancy film clips with, women and fancy cars. It's just us out there having a go. So I think that was also part of the reaction, not just the economic reaction. I think the other thing that I've read in regard to that whole kind of northwest area of America that a lot of people were complaining about, when bands would do their American tours, of course they go to the big places like, Chicago, New York, that kind of thing, but they'd often ignore that northwest corner. And in the end, places like in Seattle where they say that grunge emanated from, they said, stuff this, we'll do our own, that they're ignoring us. And there seemed to be a constant theme. Well, they'll do some of the big cities in California, but not go further north in the coast.
We can expect the Hobart sound very soon then.
Yeah,
or maybe the Darwin sound.
That came out because once they did sign their record contracts, Nirvana, Pearl Jam were notorious for it. Mm-hmm. Pearl Jam's second album, Versus, they didn't actually release any videos or anything. And this was also at a time of is it Napster? The digital recording, and remember the whole Metallica thing, and
that's right.
Ticket prices were being out of control, and so I suppose that's where it becomes like a political thing or whatever, in that they rejected the music industry.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, but just to give us a definition of grunge, I've gone to the Bible, of course, which is Wikipedia, and they've said grunge, sometimes referred to as the Seattle sound, is an alternative rock genre and subculture that emerged during the mid-80s in the American Pacific Northwest state of Washington, particularly in Seattle and nearby towns. Grunge fuses elements of punk rock and heavy metal but without punk's structure and speed. The genre features distorted electric guitar sound used in both genres, although some bands performed with more emphasis on one or the other. Grunge also incorporates influences from indie rock bands such as Sonic Youth. Lyrics are typically angst-filled and introspective, often addressing themes such as social alienation, self-doubt, abuse, neglect, betrayal, social and emotional isolation, addiction and psychological trauma, and a desire for freedom.
Happy times.
Yeah,
and I agree with that. And
it's not a bad definition.
Probably the only difference that I would say with grunge is some bands that represent grunge would put some melody in their music as well, which probably differed from punk. Think about this one, Smells Like Teen Spirit. Now also picture this, More Than a Feeling, Boston. They're similar.
How do you get from Nirvana to Boston?
Think about it. Think about the two tunes. They're actually very similar.
Yeah.
Slightly different tempo, but they're very similar.
No, well, Dave Grohl has said that the Fooey sometimes warm up, or they were warming up to Rick Astley, Never Gonna Give You Up, because it's very similar in chord progression and tune to Smells Like Teen Spirit. And
I'll have to give that a listen to. I've never thought of that.
To the point where Rick Astley was actually at a Fooey's concert in Britain somewhere. It's on YouTube. And they found out that Rick Astley was there. And they pulled him up on stage and he sang Never Gonna Give You Up, played by the Fooeys, as more a rock song. And it's great. Rick Astley just rolled
I'm going to have to see that.
It's fantastic.
Look, a good song's a good song.
Yeah.
When it came to the grunge scene, I was probably definitely a late adapter to it. I was certainly aware of like albums that came out all around the same time. So when you look at like the big album like Nevermind, and that came out the same time as Blood Sugar Sex Magic. I think it came out the same time as one of the Pearl Jam albums. When you're talking about the early 90s, there's probably 4 or 5 big albums that I've ignored around that time, but it was a very big era. And initially when I heard like the whole Nirvana album, I had to give it another listen because it was different. And I remember thinking, I need to give it another listen. I just haven't quite come across something like this. And then after a little while, you realise it's a kind of music you just enjoy. You don't analyse. You just feel it. That's how it works. Kurt Cobain has sometimes even said that some of his famous songs, the meanings of the words, there is none. He just put things together as a collage.
Yeah.
It's
very John Lennon-esque, isn't it?
Yeah,
well,
very much.
It's like David Bowie, who used to think up lines and sentences of things, and he used to actually chop them up with scissors and play 52 pickup on the floor with them, and that would become a song.
Yeah. But then, the 90s to me was also like the height of all the rock journalists and Rolling Stone and who was on the cover of the Rolling Stone and like MTV and all the other things, and everyone wanted to know, tell me everything about that song, and do these lyrics represent your childhood? And it's like, no, like
just having fun.
Yeah, like we made them up, and sure, some of them do, and on reflection, but everyone was trying to analyze everything, and it became this immense bubble that eventually burst. And I think that's where potentially, it burst after grunge, after the death of Kurt Cobain. So if you refer back to our episode of the 27 Club, like it's almost a tragedy. And you think about the subsequent death of everyone else. Chris Cornell, only a couple of years ago was dealing with, trauma and addiction, and all of them had some sort of trauma addiction, as do most people. Yeah. And so did it cause it? Was it cause and effect? Who knows?
Also, the guy who was the lead singer of Blind Melon, he also died
at 29.
At 28 or 29.
Heroin overdoses.
Oh,
they all died of heroin overdoses.
Yep.
Nate Staley, the lead singer of Alice in Chains.
Well-known addiction problem.
Stone Temple Pilots. What's his name?
Scott Weiland.
Yeah, Scott Weiland. Pearl Jam came out of after the death of Andrew Wood, who was the lead singer of a band called Mother Love Bone. And that's where Temple of the Dog got together, who was sort of a hybrid of Leftover, Mother Love Bone, and Chris Cornell sort of Soundgarden, they came together, and Pearl Jam came from that. They obviously needed a lead singer, so they found Eddie Vedder. Eddie Vedder's potentially, apart from the other band members, the only sort of one that's singers that's left.
We've got to hold on to the Pearl Jam brand.
What about Perry Farrell?
Oh, Perry Farrell. See, that's different. See, Alice, what are they called?
Jane's Addiction. Well, yeah, they're not Seattle.
No, they're not Seattle. And they were around a long time before. They sort of came out of the sort of LA punk scene, alternative scene, that same as the Red Hot Chili Peppers scene. It's a very sort of different subculture.
I just love how Perry Farrell looks like a mid-60s businessman now.
I know. I'm going to see him next week.
Oh, are you? Fantastic.
Yeah. I'm going to see the Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh, that's sold out.
And Amyl and the Sniffers next Wednesday night in Sydney.
Oh, tremendous.
I'm so excited.
You couldn't make up a name like Amyl and the Sniffers, could you? Such a unique name.
Depends what circles. But yeah, it's a great name.
It's a great name. Yeah, they're more the LA scene, but they're of the same time. Yeah, see, another one which is more from the LA scene the California scene, apart from the Chili Peppers, is Presidents of the USA.
Yeah.
Oh, they were fun.
Yeah, they just played for fun, and it was great.
You've got bands like Primus. You know, they were great, and they were, you know, they'd been around forever. But then it was just the fusion of having these quirky little songs and these incredible film clips as well. You know, and we all just watch the film clips. I mean, Jane's Addiction, I'm sure everyone comes to mind of being caught stealing.
Yeah.
You know, that just like, what?
Yeah.
I think probably one of the biggest differences and why we hold on to the grunge era, the grunge movement was probably one of the last significant movements where bands actually cut their teeth in pubs and clubs before they actually made it big. And it had that kind of sense of like they started from the very bottom, build themselves up, and now have a look at them now. And it was that kind of era at the time where I can remember there's one or two exceptions afterwards, but that kind of era changed. Another thing that actually changed too as we go through the 90s is that, in the early 90s kind of thing, people were still buying, you know, CDs of the music or other types of devices. You still go to record shops. So the promotion of it through like the media and television was still there. However, by the end of the 90s, there was a different way that was starting to consume music, where it was becoming a lot more on the internet. And from that too, like musical journalists started to lose their power as well. I think a lot of artists were starting to realise that they could become famous via the internet. And you're starting to see that happen where some bands were tending to be like manufactured. So what grunge is sometimes like an end of an era with, I admit, one or two exceptions. Like I do know a band like Oasis did start in the pub and club scene and they became big a little bit after, you know, Nirvana. But it's just kind of like who comes through, who gets through to mainstream now? Yeah, they just don't seem to have those pub and club roots like they used to before. It's very much changed. And the role of like the media reporting it, like some of those magazines and things like that used to be so influential. Some of them don't even exist now. It was a real kind of end of an era at that stage. You know, Nirvana coming out almost having like Beatlemania type of effect they have on like some crowds. And it's hard to really think, you know, a band that actually started with pubs and clubs having that same impact now. You know, or something in the last 20 years, they're usually manufactured or put together by Simon Cowell or somebody else like that.
Yeah, and also
it was a changing of the guard. Yeah,
it's so hard to find venues now where rock music is allowed. Any sort of performance is allowed. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not like you can just walk down the main street of Newtown on a Sunday afternoon anymore and see something happening at the Sando. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, look, there are still bands that play. They're not sort of massive bands, but they're really trying to bring it back. Like there are bands that play in pubs, like the Duke has bands all the time. That's on Emma Road. You know, there are bands around that they're getting there. There's a few little sort of offshoot venues that are not necessarily pubs and clubs. They're just almost like spaces.
Yeah.
You know, There's a great Sydney band that I love, and they're called Coffin, Children of Finland Fighting in Norway.
Oh, that's
and
good.
They're amazing. Yeah, they're from the Northern Beaches, and they're this great, like, punk rock and roll band. I'm obsessed with them.
I'll have to look them up.
Yeah, love it. Amazing. And they actually have been touring Europe and Britain and everything with Amel and the Sniffers. But they're incredible. I actually like them more than Amel and the Sniffers.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll have to look them up. I've not heard of them.
Yeah, amazing.
So if they're coming from the Northern Beaches, are they wearing their mandatory navy striped T-shirts?
No.
I think it's actually, we've got to give them credit. They actually travelled outside of the Northern Beaches.
True.
Yes.
We've got to give them credit for that.
See, but then there's another amazing band from the Northern Beaches called Ocean Alley. Have you heard of them?
I have to admit, no.
I'm completely obsessed with them. They're sort of like a reggae, rock band. Incredible. They travel the world. I love Ocean Alley. But you probably couldn't see them here, even though they probably did start playing somewhere here. You all have to start somewhere. They just travel the world and do festivals, and they're probably playing at Coachella this weekend. Like,
good on them.
Band. And there's probably like 7 of them in the band. Like, it's full, keyboard, piano, and then all the different guitars, and amazing band.
After Kurt Cobain passed away, and then we're starting to talk about other big bands in the 90s, for me, I think a few bands that stand out in my memory, Stone Temple Pilots, Faith No More. I saw Faith No More twice. I really like seeing them live. I missed out on Stone Temple Pilots, which is a bit of a shame. I remember Bush as well. I used to really enjoy them, another big 90s band. And Cake.
Oh, Cake, of course.
And Cake, I just love their take on music. That was brilliant. But, I mean, that's just the list that's coming from on top of my head. Like, after that era, who were some of the big 90s bands that you guys remember?
Well, I saw Hunters and Collectors a few times. The Whitlams, saw them.
Mm-hmm.
Who else did I see? Can't remember who else I saw back in the day. Cure. Love the Cure. Can't think who else. I didn't go as often because that's when I was studying and stuff, and
But were there big standout bands that you remember from there? Because some of the ones you mentioned, started in the 80s as well, but you remember the ones who really made it big in the 90s?
No. Oh, apart from the Whitlams, and then once the Blow Up the Pokies thing came out, it was like they lost me then.
Funny, I actually do enjoy
Eternal
that album.
Nightcap, they lost me on that one. Oh, and Dave Graney, of course.
Yes.
Oh, he's getting back together and touring with the Coral Snakes.
Oh, sweet. Let's go.
Yeah, go to that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I saw them at the Three Weeds at Roselle, and it was great.
The one Australian band I remember was the Cruel Sea.
Oh, I love the Cruel Sea. Yeah.
Never saw them live, but Tex.
I kind of saw them live, and I say kind of because Tex was hopelessly drunk, and he'd come on and do a song, and then they'd take him off stage, and the band would do a musical bit, and then they tried to drag him back out to see if he was sober enough to put something together, and he'd slur his words for about a couple of verses, and the band was just saying, it's not working. So I saw them do basically an instrumental gig.
Well, that's all right. That's equally as good.
It was, but everyone was thinking the whole ensemble, and I didn't really see it.
Another band of the 90s, which were huge, were Radiohead.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
But they're not Britpop. They're
British,
not
but not Britpop. Yeah.
Yeah. But they were the Pink Floyd of the time. They were just so complex and what?
Yeah. Are they classifiable?
No.
People who have covered their songs, just beautiful. Well, you see, sometimes when you listen to a cover, you really appreciate the writing and the lyrics of a song more. And well, I must say Postmodern Jukebox has helped me with that one a lot, because they really, in playing songs in different genres, you get to hear the lyrics especially. It's just tremendous. You just don't realise how complex some songs are sometimes.
And then another band was Green Day.
Green Day, of course.
Huge, but they're not grunge. They're not you know, are they left over that punk? Are they that LA sort of punky, like?
Well, they're out of California in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They started, you know, little baby emos. You know, that's sort of where everyone was dyeing their hair green.
I don't know why you said that band, and it just reminded me of Blink-182.
Yes.
All the Small Things is just such a great clip.
Huge
I love
band.
it.
Huge band that I absolutely despise.
But see, I like my favourite Blink. My favourite Blink-182 is "I Miss You."
No,
that is a great song. I love that.
No, let's just delete this whole section and move on. So, but then you start.
Are you editing, Captain?
Sorry.
Are you going to be doing the edit, Captain?
Yeah, no. But then you have songs. Then you have bands, you know, like Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah,
you know,
never liked them.
I found them a little bit too much.
You know, like, but they're sort of starting to have, you know, they've got as much angst and whatever as grunge, but that, you know, they sung about political things. You know, so where did they fit? So this is where I think 90s just enabled bands to sort of almost do whatever you wanted. But then there's always been bands of every different type of music genre throughout. It's just what you like and what you gravitate to.
Yeah.
Except Blink-182.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Like, I can't stand Rage Against the Machine. Can't stand them. But I don't mind quite a lot of Blink-182. I read Travis Barker's biography.
Mm-hmm.
He's
come on, you've got to say something.
He's an interesting bloke. My sister had the book, so I borrowed it off her. He's driven and he's obsessive with stuff, that which got him into drugs and things. But since he's cleaned up, and he had to do it because he was going to be very ill or dead very quickly, and he wanted to be there for his kids. Like, he co-manages a clothing line as well. It's worth multi-millions of dollars, and yeah, he's an interesting bloke. And when he married into the Kardashians, that wasn't quite the surprise that the media made it out to be, because before the Kardashians were famous, they were next door neighbours for quite a while. And so he knew them as people.
I think it's just the optics. When you look at the two of them together, they couldn't be more chalk and cheese. Yeah. If you don't know their background, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I just love how he's sort of inked in a hairline around his forehead now.
Yeah.
I think that goes to show when you got that much money, you don't care.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, tons of money. See, and then you have bands like Tool.
I've forgotten about them.
Korn, those sort of new metal bands.
Yeah.
But that they were all huge, and that, you know, I hate the term new metal because it's not. I don't see it as metal. It was just loud, you know, electronic. Ministry, incredible band. So you've got this real mismatch of bands. Then where would you put Beck?
Loved him.
You know?
Yeah.
Then you think British bands that aren't Britpop, like Massive Attack and Portishead. Like, you know, they're not Britpop. They were totally different sort of band.
Yeah. I must say I moved on from Massive Attack and Portishead when a friend of mine committed suicide, and she was heavily into them, and I just can't listen to them anymore. The one with Courtney Taylor, the band. What are they called?
Lost me there.
No, stay with me.
Okay. All right. So, you know, within that new metal stuff, once again, I hate that term, 9 Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you put those? Because they were, you know, groundbreaking, because their stage shows, they sung about topics that were like risque. You know, they had incredible in-your-face videos. Like, yeah.
The band I was thinking of, the Dandy Warhols with Courtney Taylor Taylor.
Right.
They're not British. Are they from Chicago?
Oh, sure. I thought they were British.
No, they're American.
You're right. They're American. I was wrong. I'm just looking.
Yeah, are they from Chicago?
Yeah, but they're another band I just can't do because of said friend.
From the British side of Chicago.
Yeah.
Yes. That brings us to the end of part 1, dear listener, of our 90s ramble. Stay tuned for our next episode where we conclude our chat. Until then, take care.